I would like to talk about getting out of your own way. This is a subject that I've covered several times over the years in various Zen videos, but I'd like to talk about it today from a slightly different perspective. And if you haven't seen it, this is in answer, if you will, to a video that I made recently on my other channel. Now, you don't have to see that other video. I'm not continuing from it, but you may find it useful anyways. At any rate, let's go. The aspect that I want to touch on now with regard to getting out of your own way is related to the magic that I'm feeling right now from this tulip tree. And this is something that we will get into a little later, another aspect of this, now that I think of it. But there's something so powerful about this. And it's interesting because what we see here is the result of the conflict, if you will, between nature, life, and the structure that we try to impose upon it. And this metal upon which this vine climbed 30 years ago, and that connects us to that other video that I mentioned earlier. What an interesting coincidence, because 30 years ago I was making that song, Hyperspace, Zulu Matrix, that has led to so much this year. And so at the same time, 30 years ago that I was doing that is when this was planted and this was set in place here, this tower, and it began. And now here we are 30 years later, and we can see that the vine is now a tree, and it has begun to absorb the metal tower upon which it climbed. And this is a perfect analogy for what's happening within us when we are getting in our own way. That is the realm of the ego, is this notion of the imposition of that structure. This structure, this tower, is the perfect example of what we, and isn't this interesting? Power. This is the representation of power. The Tower of Power. And let's just think for a moment about what this does. The ego, with its false representation of power, in violation of, in contradiction to reality itself. We are now in this era within which the system of power has become so deeply ingrained into our consciousness, into our being, through the ego, the perception that we have imposed upon ourselves that says, I am. That's the ego. It doesn't have to be complicated or fancy. That's it. But that's not real. That's why in Zen the question always arises, who is it that is asking the question? Who is it that thinks that they have power? This represents, this is interesting. We are now in 2024, recent events just in the last couple of days are pointing to a potential catastrophe of our own making in 2026. And it's entirely in the hands of those few who believe that they are in power. And that power is the ultimate illusion. For without our consent, there would be no power. But we freely give it because we've been so indoctrinated into this idea of power, and we want it for ourselves, and we try to impose our will. That's the ego again. I want this. I am that. And so it's by our own short-sightedness, our own self-centered desire that gets in the way of being free. So we, the I, gets in its own way. Does that make sense? This is the result of my handiwork. Before I pruned this, it wasn't like this shape of a tree with the trunk and the top, the beautiful top that's so rich and lush. The whole thing was just a massive spire of vine. But by pruning it, I let it have this incredible form to show the pillar of strength that's here. So that if the tower was gone, which it one day will be because it will be completely absorbed and dissolved by the tree within. That's the metaphor for what's happening to the planet. Life is the life. And so this is on the planet itself. And the metal is us. And if we destroy ourselves in 2 years, or should I say, when we destroy ourselves at some time in the future, which could be much sooner or much later, who knows? Uncertainty is the only certainty. And you see, that's the other way. For the purposes of this video, we won't go any deeper than that because I don't want to make this video too long. But for now, that's the other way that we will look at. that we get in our own way is with this false notion of certainty. When we think that we know what will happen, we try to predict the future. That's what the ego does. It's a byproduct of the primary functioning of the brain, is to observe and extrapolate, to try to predict the future upon which our own survival depended in the evolutionary past, when we needed to outsmart the predators. We were the prey. And it was only through our ability to develop our intellect to be able to outsmart them by predicting their behavior. And now that very life-giving, evolution-empowering tendency is now the engine of our undoing, of our self-destruction. You see what I'm saying? But it doesn't have to be that way. But just to complete this metaphor, when we trigger our own self-destruction, we will destroy 99.9999% of all life on the planet. Nuclear winter is not exactly gentle. And who knows what other cataclysms we may or may not unleash, perhaps even simultaneously. But let's look at this on a planetary time scale. Let's go forward 1 billion years, which is but a chapter in the life of the planet. All trace of us will be gone. And the planet that was almost completely stripped of life by our cataclysm, our cataclysmic end, will be restored and renewed in a new form that we may, if we were able to look into the future right now through some instrument to see the planet 1 billion years from now, we perhaps would not even be able to recognize it anymore. But it would be a new form of life, the next iteration, without us and our damage long gone. Continental drift and subduction, volcanic eruptions and subduction will completely erase all traces of us and everything we ever did. There may still be some space junk in orbit around the planet. Not in low orbit, but high orbit. All the low orbit stuff will have fallen down and joined in the subduction party. But life will continue. Perhaps the dominant species will not be dominant in that iteration, because it is this dominance, the defining feature of Homo sapiens, is trying to dominate over everything and everyone. And so whatever the life form is that is most developed 1 billion years from now, hopefully won't be as ego-driven, as self-deceptive as we are. Now, let's bring that back to the scale of the individual. In this place where I live, It's all nature in all directions. This sacred space, made sacred by these hands, not in the spirit of power or of domination, but of interaction, of relation, of mutual cooperation. And it keeps me alive in so many ways. Not least of which is the fact that although I'm alone here and have been for 10 years, I'm never lonely. I'm always surrounded by life. And I'm always busy. I scarcely have enough time to make these silly videos. I'm constantly telling myself to stop making these videos. But occasionally, people reach out to me and say that they appreciate it. So I keep doing it. Why not? But I don't have a lot of time for it because I'd rather be doing just about anything else except standing here making a fool of myself talking to that camera and then spending hours editing or whatever. At any rate, in this sacred space, I'm never lonely because I'm woven into the fabric of life itself, and it feeds my being in terms of the joy of life itself, and also the many ways that I grow food here, from nuts on the trees to the various gardens and fruits and vegetables and whatever else I'm growing. And as I was saying, and this is where the second part of the tulip tree comes into play, I'm not doing any of this in a spirit of domination or control or anything like that. I'm not imposing. One might think that I'm sculpting, but I'm not. I'm pruning. And so, just like this sacred trumpet tree, the tree was always here. It just needed to be revealed by pruning. And so it is with us. You don't need to change anything about yourself. You don't need to impose anything upon yourself. Just reveal what's already there and maybe hidden, especially under layers of all of this baggage that's imposed onto us by society. We are born and indoctrinated into these notions of this kind of power relationship, that one has power over another, and then we join in the struggle and try to have power of our own to impose onto something else or someone else. And all that is doing is concretizing the distortion, the illusion that what we are trying to impose is real. when power itself is the ultimate illusion. And to unburden ourselves, to set ourselves free from those shackles, is natural. As natural as this beautiful breeze, keeping me cool on this ridiculously, unbelievably hot 15th of September here in southern Ontario. Feels more like July. But it's beautiful because it's extending the growing season. Especially for those trees that I had to prune rather vigorously in this other video that I just shot yesterday. And there you see it again. The very same thing, where by pruning away the dead parts, the dying parts, then new strength, new life can thrive. And this, I suppose, is something that we could do ourselves by pruning away, cutting away the dead parts of the self. Because the physical self is the real self. But the notion of who we're trying to be, or who we're trying to become, or anything else like that, that's not real, that's the dead part, that's the diseased part. Prune that away and let the real part grow in vigor, in strength, in integrity, in peace, in life. In short, get out of your own way. To be continued.